All right, everybody. Welcome to the Wednesday, February 17th Environmental Matters Committee meeting. And for the record, Alderman Arnett and myself are in attendance. Alderwoman Tierney is unable to make it. So first order of business, any motions for the agenda?
Move we amend the agenda to add at the beginning a briefing on the Greenway plan.
I'll second that motion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. All right. And how about the minutes? Approval of minutes.
Move we approve the minutes as submitted.
I'll second that. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. And I guess we could jump right into Ms. Algrim and the Greenway update before we go to the development and the legislation.
Okay.
Right. I'm trying to get, whoops. All right, can you all hear me okay?
You can.
Looks good. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate it.
We're happy
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Again, I'm Joanna Ogburn, and I am currently serving as the chair of the Annapolis Conservancy Board. And as you guys have probably heard from us or have heard or seen in the emails, we have been developing, I would say, a draft of a Greenway plan for the city of Annapolis. So something that can help us identify where are those really important places, ecologically speaking, but also important connections between recreational trails, places that are important aesthetically, or that have really important community benefits. We want to be able to highlight all of those on the map and then begin to think about how or if it's appropriate to protect some of these places and or enhance them through restoration or by putting additional access easements, whatever is really needed to make those places kind of, this is going to sound very cheesy, but it's what's coming to mind, be all they can be. So I'm sorry, I'm at the end of a long spat of meetings, so I apologize. So we have been working really closely with the board, also with Sean Wampler, and then Director Sally Nash and Eric Laczynski on this Greenway plan, and of course, Jackie Gild as well. And I want to start off by showing you a tool that Sean built for us, and I can't thank Sean enough.
Yay, Sean! Yay, Sean!
Yes,
we could not
have done this. My GIS skills are terrible. So Sean, thank you so much. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. Hopefully this works. Oh, it's looking good so far. All right, can you guys see that?
Yes.
Looks good. Okay, so this is a tool that Sean Wampler developed, and we sort of told her the kinds of things we were looking to do with it, and she found a way to do it. So this was a way for us to collect input on where people think, what types of places we should include in a Greenway plan map. And maybe I should take a quick step back. So a couple of things I mentioned we were looking for. We're trying to identify places that are important ecologically speaking, so your forest corridors, any remaining forest spaces, places that could provide recreational benefit, aesthetics, community benefit. We wanted to identify those places that currently have that existing characteristic that may be of interest to protect, and also places that we felt could provide those kinds of benefits and characteristics, and kind of think through what it might take to do that. Ultimately, we're hoping to have a Greenway map that sort of links together these spaces into connected corridors that can provide, again, those ecological benefits, but also hopefully passive recreational opportunities and community benefits as well. Does that make sense to everybody? Do you have any questions? Okay.
Are you going to tell us what the colors mean on the map?
I'm stalling successfully. Yes, I am going to tell you what those colors mean. Okay. I apologize. Yeah, so what we did as a board, we had a subcommittee that sat down and poured over a lot of maps to try to identify these areas that we thought were important to include on a Greenway map. Then what we did was we asked for input from all of the city's boards and commissions, which you know better than I do how many that is, but it was I I think it's over 20, a large amount of people. We wanted their input as well. And we asked for city council members' input. We asked for input from the African American liaison and Hispanic liaison to the city, and groups like the Waterways Cabinet. So we reached out to a number of folks to sort of get input to identify what places were important to include. And they provided that input using this tool that you see in front of you. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And all these areas that are in yellow are places that people have identified as ones they think are important to include on a Greenway map, because either they provide that ecological benefit, recreation, open space, one of those types of characteristics. So all the places you see in yellow are ones that people think should be on our Greenway map because they provide these characteristics or could. The existing green ones, the sort of darker green color, are easements that we currently have with the city of Annapolis, and the light green are existing park spaces. And then of course that tree icon sort of highlights where there's some smaller green spaces that exist that just don't show up at this scale on the map. Any questions about what the map is showing at this moment? Okay. All right, then I'm going to show you over to the right-hand side. You see this kind of list, and all of these areas that I'm scrolling through are ones that people have inputted into the map. So they're able to, I can show you what you can do. So if you come to this tool and you click on add an area, you're able to then, see, I could zoom into a spot here, and I won't save this, Sean, so I don't want to scare you. But then you could sort of circle or highlight an area that you wanted to include on the Greenway map that you think should be considered. And then you could go over to the right-hand side and say why you think it's important to include on the Greenway map. You can provide your primary reason, a secondary reason, and then comments. And you could submit it, and then that would show up as a yellow spot here on the map. I'm going to cancel it because I just made that up, that particular example. But that's how this input tool works. And we had, I think our Conservancy Board, as you can see, we listed all the ones that we put in here. And I think we probably had, I don't know, about 50 to 60 sites. On top of that, and I don't know if Eric or Sean, if you could speak to this, I didn't actually count, but I believe we've had at least 50 other submissions of places that should be included in the Greenway map, which I was pretty happy with. Sometimes these tools, people, it's hard to get people to use them. So I was pretty happy, and I heard from a number of boards, and we actually got some individual suggestions from Annapolis Environmental Commission, and I think a couple of council members that came in that we're kind of adding in by hand.
We have about 100, I believe, total.
100 total.
Yeah.
So I think that probably is about half and half coming from the board and half coming from other folks, other boards and sort of city council members and staff. Does that sound about right, Eric?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to attribute them, to be honest, yet, but
okay.
In terms of who they're coming from, but I just know that it's about the total number of suggestions that we've received.
Joanna, I did send you a little bit ago, there's a dashboard which will let you break down and show the different types in a graph of submissions. That's that second, yeah.
Okay.
And there's also in the main application, you saw a little heart to the right. That's where people could indicate that they agreed with a comment that had already been made.
That's right. So I'll jump back and show you that. So what Sean was just talking about is you see to the right here, these are individual submissions again. There's a little heart and then the number 2. So one thing you can also do, which is kind of fun, is you could zoom in here, and if you say, oh, I also think that this place should be included on the map, you can click on it, and then you can click this heart here on the right. So it's kind of, if your area that you're interested in including on the map has already been put in, you can like it, if you will, and sort of kind of vote for it that way. I don't know how much we should kind of focus on those numbers, because I don't know how many people, really use that application, but it is there, and some people certainly did kind of share with us what their interest was. And I realize that you guys are looking at my email at the moment. I apologize, bear with me. I lost that link. But the other piece which Sean did, which is also really neat, and Sean, you may want to talk more about this because you are the architect, but is this dashboard that Sean created to kind of show us why people were choosing the different parcels they were choosing. Do you want to give an introduction to it, Sean?
Well, I'm trying to think of if there's more things we can add to it, but Esri does have the ability now to do these dashboards to try to take those kind of tabular things and make them a little more visual so that you can really see what your data is saying and hopefully get a better idea of any patterns of what people are wanting for this Greenway project.
Yeah, and one thing we can easily do here is, I don't know if you can see where my cursor is, but it's showing how many of these inputs. So total, we have 102 entries and 56 were put in by the Conservancy Board, which I think is pretty good. So we have, 46 or so that are coming from folks outside of the Conservancy Board, which I think is kind of positive. Where we kind of want to go from here with this is a couple of steps. One, and Eric, please jump in here, but Eric and some other staff with the planning department are looking at all of the submissions that have been made to the map to kind of vet them and see if it makes sense to include them, maybe cut down some of the areas that are included in the yellow. Sometimes people just highlighted an entire parcel and it's really just a portion of it that's sort of meant to really be included on that Greenway map. So they're kind of going through and culling things that way and checking to make sure it makes sense. And then what a few of us on the Annapolis Conservancy Board are also doing is we're looking at some base data layers. So layers like ecological connectivity, tributaries, bike plans, to try to use those base layers to link up these yellow areas that have been submitted, if that makes sense, to really take what's been submitted and turn it into connected greenways throughout the city. So those two things are kind of happening simultaneously, I think, over this month and next month, if that sounds right to you, Eric. You guys are kind of vetting the parcels and we're sort of helping to develop this base layer that's going to connect all of the things that have been identified. And we're hoping to have this included in the draft comprehensive plan that's going to be released in a few months, I think. And at that time, be able to take feedback from the public and see what areas we may have missed or what things they might have questions about and kind of fine tune it. But we're really excited about it. I think it has a lot of potential applications. One for the Conservancy Board is it helps us identify those places that may need easements that we can go about and talk to the landowners and see if they're interested in that and start to work towards a conservation easement. It also provides, I think, kind of a guiding document for where we could make restoration enhancements or additional access points throughout the city. So I think it can serve a number of purposes. And again, this is just the first step in this direction, but we're really excited. I'm happy about the input that we've gotten so far. And yeah, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all may have or show any other parts of this tool.
Joanna, how many people do we know do we get outside of the city? Because I know some of those marks were made by staff as well. Do we know?
Do you mean outside of the Conservancy Board or outside of city
outside
staff?
Of the Conservancy Board and outside of city staff?
I don't know outside of city staff. I can tell you about half of the inputs were made by people outside of the Conservancy Board. I don't know how many staff made. So that's a good question. Yeah, Eric, I don't know if you had any knowledge of what staff may have done. I didn't send the map out to anybody on the staff in particular. I let sort of the staff handle that side of it. So I'm not really sure how much input they've had at this point.
I don't really have much insight on that at all, frankly. I was just kind of waiting to see, the Conservatives did all the outreach on this and we were just kind of waiting to see what we got. The only thing I was going to add to what Joanna said, from a comprehensive plan perspective, where we would like to go is ultimately have a prioritization methodology here, finding some way of determining which of the parcels might be more short-term opportunities or midterm or long-term, and a lot of that would be based on the value that they have from an environmental perspective or public use perspective, being kind of specific in that regard. So, it's challenging because, you know, we don't really have the time right now to sort of ground truth everything. We kind of have to go by what we can glean from our GIS data, you know, in regard to these parcels, their proximity to other resources and so forth. But that's kind of where we would like to go from a comprehensive planning perspective, and just to be able to distinguish, you know, that some of these are going to, I imagine, are going to be much more critical assets than others. But I don't want to discredit any of them. But, you know, I think some of them you could probably put some point value to their importance. But
I've got Julian, can you drop this screen so we can see? Oh wait, that's from Joanne. I'm sorry. Can you?
Yep, absolutely.
There we go. Thank you. Be good to see each other now. So I guess, Joanna, can you just step back a little bit? And for those watching, can you explain again just the motivation behind this, the benefits to the Greenway, and how that ties into the work that the Conservancy Board is doing?
Absolutely, that's a good question. So the Conservancy Board, we are a board of 7, and our primary mission is to monitor and continue to manage the easements that are held by the City of Annapolis, as well as some of the natural properties that the City of Annapolis owns. Also, as part of our mission has been to look for additional potential easement candidates. So places throughout the city that may be important to protect, so they could provide ecological benefit, but also passive recreation opportunities, things for hiking, for biking, or because they have a particular community benefit and we want to protect that. All the work that we do in terms of reaching out to landowners to see if they're interested in an easement, that's completely voluntary. So if folks aren't interested, we don't pursue it. We are now thankfully in a position to begin to work on new easements, thanks to a new memorandum of understanding that Jackie helped put together with the Critical Area Commission, which provides necessary funding to do things like boundary surveys. So there's due diligence pieces that you have to do when you begin to think about developing easements. So we're in a really good position now. So for the board, one thing we wanted to take a look at, because we're now able to be in a more proactive position, is, okay, where are those assets that exist throughout the city that would be important to consider protecting? So that was sort of where we began to think about creating a map like this and identifying where are some of those key places left that are important as open space, recreation, green space. And so that was where we came at it from. Initially was identifying where are those potential candidates that might make for good easements. And then we knew that the Annapolis Environmental Commission and others, there's been a discussion about developing a Greenway map that can not only highlight places that would be good for protection, that might also be good to enhance, to restore either for ecological reasons or again, to add more access to water, to provide connections between existing trails. So we wanted to look for that as well. So not just areas that could be protected, but places that could be enhanced. And some of those may even be existing city properties. That was actually one kind of neat thing that we fell upon when we started digging into the properties across the city, where there are a number of small city-owned properties that we weren't aware of that could be some really neat opportunities for recreation and open space, kind of meeting those needs. So we wanted to develop a map that showed where are all these places that provide these important benefits to the city, right? And map that out and kind of look at it. And from there, use that as a base layer to then look at each of those potential options, as Eric was saying, and prioritize them, right? Based on which ones of these are really important places to protect, to be able to preserve the existing benefits, and which places do we need to make some enhancements, right? Where do we need to create a new trail to create access between 2 existing green spaces, or we need a bike path? Is this a place where we could put that? So it's really about, we've got the first step, right? A very, very introductory level, which is this base map showing where are some of the key places that exist across the city. We need to vet those, make sure they all make sense, get the spacing right, get the sizing right for those areas that are shown on the map. We're going to look at how they connect with existing ecological attributes and things across the city. And then that next important step is really dig in and figure out what would you want to do with each of these areas in order to ensure we've got those benefits protected, or to fix it up to provide those benefits we want. So that's that really next important step. Sorry. Have some animals that are.
Hey, if I could just interject too here, and also we were some other ideas were that some of these areas might be good pocket parks.
Yeah.
We don't have, a lot of cities like DC, for example, have a lot of like little parks, and it's a place where you can sit and have lunch, read a book. They also can be community gardens, especially sprinkle them around the city. Everybody of all kinds of backgrounds is interested and seems to be growing your own food these days. And to the extent that any of them link to trails or to other like bike trails that the mayor is planning, they could be access points. And if any of them are near water, they could be, I've got animals too, water access points.
That's right. No, it's an excellent point, Jackie. And I really appreciate you kind of adding that in there. I think, for us, it's highlighting what is still there and has possibilities, right, within the city when it comes to open space and green space and all that it can provide. That's that first step, which is where this map comes in. And that second step is, and what do we need to do with each of these places to make it really happen, to either protect it or enhance it. So we're in that very first stage, but it's an important first stage. And
I get really excited about kind of creating these corridors, because I think when I first looked at what we were calling the Greenway map, it was, these sort of disparate parcels that didn't really have any connection. They were just the easements that we currently own. And if you look at the Greenway survey map, I mean, you can really start to see these linkages. There's essentially almost a loop going around the city. There's a connection around, kind of at the headwaters of Back Creek. So some of that may not be accessible, may not make sense for trails, but, you have these habitat corridors that have value too. So, and other environmental benefits, but.
Yeah, and there's definitely, sorry, I'll get you, Alderman Arnett, just a quick point. So I do think there's definitely a lot of benefit to having the Greenway and the potential connections identified in some kind of plan, because that does allow us to, I think, it will help definitely, I think, support us in terms of pursuing any kind of grant funding or use of the POS money, program space money, as well as Forest Conservation Act. It helps to add an extra layer of protection. And not to mention, I think, supporting planning and zoning and the site design review process to make sure these areas, gives them the ability, I think, to make sure these areas get protected, whatnot, moving forward. So I guess to that end, what's the plan? I guess what's this going to look like in the end? Is it going to be a separate plan? Is it going to be rolled into the comprehensive plan? Is it going to be both of those? Do you have any kind of idea moving forward what your vision is?
We definitely want to have it in the comp plan, in a map. Our immediate next steps are sort of creating a more formalized map that has these parcels identified by priority, at least some sort of hierarchy or way of categorizing them. And I think down the road, we haven't necessarily coordinated with the Conservancy yet on this, but I think I sort of feel like we'll have to do some more on the ground research on some of these, to ascertain, exactly what's going on with some of them, or, ground truth. But I think for the comprehensive plan, just having some kind of methodology would be valuable for prioritizing.
Alderman Arnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Several things. One, I have this vague recollection of a Greenway plan from a while ago that already existed. Am I confusing that with a county plan? I thought there was a Greenway plan document, but that could just be my advancing age. But I do think that I think it is also something that has merit as a standalone document that you can go to your magic shelf and pull out the Greenway plan. I think it certainly all of those principles should go in the comp plan too, but I think the whys and wherefores of having a Greenway plan, the process for how we solicit spaces that could be set aside to make sure we have this Greenway plan. And so that's the next question. How can we get a look at this map, this tool that Sean did? Because when I was looking at it quickly, it looked like a lot of the yellow were actually in the middle of neighborhoods. And so I'm wondering, how do we get a corridor or a pathway that's overlapping existing properties and things like that? And then I think that the next big question would be, I agree with you, Eric, wherever we can make these corridors to connect, even if it's a path, especially if it's a bicycle trail, or if it's even just a set aside that it's a known nature path. Like I saw a red fox in my backyard eating some corn that had spilled out from the bird's feeder. And so I think there's all kinds of natural corridors that are going on that we don't really know until we actually see it pop up in the backyard. So that's a lot of spewing forth, but I certainly would like to be able to look at the tool and evaluate the things. The yellow, I think, is the wish list. So look at the wish list and then think about how we could prioritize. I would suspect that the priority will come when somebody says they're willing to make an easement available to us. But we could be doing some actual recruitment going out, and I think that's part of what the Conservancy group does. So a lot of questions there, but the first big one for me is how do we get our hands on this tool to look at it?
Yeah, so it's easy. I can send you a link, or Sean, Eric, Jackie, whoever's most appropriate, but we can just send you the link to it and have at it.
Is it on the city website?
Sean, I don't know the answer. I don't think it is easily linked on the website at this point.
Not linked at this time. So we would have to send you the link to it.
Okay, well, I'd like to get it, but I bet if we put it on the website, a lot of people that we might not be thinking about would come across it and say, hey, we need to get some input here. We actually have like I know in my neighborhood, there are several parcels that are landlocked, if you will. They don't have access to the street. They're parts of people's backyards. And looking at all of the city sites, the city owns tons and tons and tons of parcels, many of which are very small, but it fit the romantic idea that Jackie brought up of a place where you could sit and feed the foxes or read a book or whatever. And so it seems to me like just going through all of the city parcels and seeing where some of these little small things that might be accessible and are not paying taxes because they're not owned by anybody, but therefore it could be something that we could make more useful.
We could add the city-owned parcels as a separate layer and color to maybe see how they work with these corridors that you're looking into.
Yeah, that would be good, particularly if we see sort of like a stepping stone patchwork where we have all these city parcels and then, if we could start connecting some of those, we could approach the landowners. If it's an easement, that means it could still be in their backyard, but it can be an easement, and they can probably get some possible tax advantages of providing that easement, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I guess I also wanted to make a few more comments. I think just going off of my last comment about the inclusion in the comp plan, I do think it's important to discuss a bit more some of the next steps, because I do think it needs to be incorporated for sure in some fashion in the comp plan. In terms of if it's a separate, maybe just a separate addendum or appendix to the comp plan as well. But I think there's strength to being a separate document as well, just because I think it gives an opportunity to get into more of the details. Because I think to Eric's question, and which very good points in terms of ranking them, I do think it may depend on the particular use, the desired goal for the Greenway. For example, if it's simply improving, if it's needed to improve the mobility for residents, for a bike path or pedestrian path or hiking path or what have you, I think it could have a different set of priorities than something that may just benefit wildlife if there is no other human connectivity, or if it's a specific ranking for simply expanding some of the or enhancing some of the existing conservation easements that the Conservancy Board may oversee. So it's certainly, I think, be interesting to get into that matrix in terms of how the priorities are going to work. And of course, some of them I think are going to be much easier to acquire than others. Some of them may just be simple easements. Others may be more beneficial to have a full purchase using POS money, that kind of thing. But yes, and also I guess just getting in terms of the policy next step. That's where I'm curious if the Conservancy Board has even gotten to this point yet, or staff, but in terms of identifying implementation policies. So once we have this report, these areas are identified, and also after they're ranked, how do we, as policymakers, incorporate that into the city code and our other programs? I think some of our programs already have provisions in there to help. I think in preparation for this, but I think there are certainly other areas that we can improve the code to make sure these areas get protected. And I'd have to do a bit more research myself to figure out and thought just in terms of what policies might be best. But has the Conservancy Board or staff started down that road yet, or is that going to kind of take place a little bit later?
I can speak from certainly the board perspective. I think that's coming a little bit later, certainly from us. And I know we've had some initial conversations with staff. I think your ideas, Alderman Savage, about site review, site design review, those kinds of things. Could this map play a role in that process? I think it's definitely something we've had that conversation and with other boards as well. So I think there's an interest there to see if it could serve that purpose. But I think it's pretty early on in those conversations. So I think that is definitely a conversation to come and to figure out what's the right role for it. And I could say, I think I agree with you guys, Alderman Arnett and Savage and Eric as well, with the idea of the plan, which is to get it into the comprehensive plan. We knew we had an opportunity to do that right now because of the update process, which was great. So it's a wonderful opportunity. Get it included there, and then perhaps as one of the strategies in the comp plan, kind of say, we'd like to develop a plan to take the next step with this map in terms of developing strategies for the different types of parcels and for the priorities. And maybe that's a space too where we get to the point of prioritizing certain things for protection, where that conversation of policy also comes into play, right? Which is, what's the right mechanism for protection, these different areas. It could be through acquisition, it could be through easement, it could be through other means like you're discussing. So I guess that's where we are at the moment. I don't know if that's helpful to you. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
If I could follow up on that, please, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
I think the city has done a lot of wonderful things over the years. We have a sidewalk plan, we have a bicycle plan, we have a trailway plan, we have a greenway plan. I think those are things that ought to be made more visible. I'm thinking of having them as a document at the Visitors Bureau or online where people can just go to the button that says city plans. But the reason I'm thinking about the Visitors Bureau, one, I think we ought to tout all of this work that we do and make it more visible. But two, I can envision, we don't know who, somebody happening to visit the city. They may be a roving philanthropist, and they see this plan and say, gee, I'd really like to add to that. I'd like to provide some dollars to help them fill in the blanks, to connect the dots on all of those pathways or trailways. But I think just the overall point of all of this work we do, the staff do, and citizens contribute to it, and then, you know, it goes on a shelf somewhere and kind of becomes invisible. So I like the idea of standalone report, and it would be one that could be made visible, could be updated from time to time.
Yeah, that was one question I had. Is there any thought yet in terms of how often this would get updated? 5 years, 10 years with the comp plan? Not yet.
Yeah, I'd see what Eric and Dr. Nash are thinking. I think on that end, we're certainly happy to help on whatever time frame you guys are open to. I don't know if you typically do that alongside the comp plan update process or how that works.
We can consider that as we go forward. It'd be nice if it wasn't a static map, that we could think of ways to keep it constantly updated depending on the regulatory impact of that. But that would be nice if it was more responsive to ongoing conditions.
So you can tell we're not excited about this at all.
Well, Sean just volunteered to do a story map of it, so I think that'd be a good idea.
All right.
Thanks, Sean.
That's great, Sean.
Yeah, I think something like that would certainly be good. And I think that was kind of one of my questions was, yeah, you know, I know a lot of this is being done during the pandemic. And it's absolutely great that we've been able to adapt to the times and have this virtual component to it. You know, and I mean, you know, hopefully we'll be able to get to a point where we can have these, excuse me, in-person meetings again, and actually let people, you know, pour over a physical map at perhaps, I don't know if Dr. Nash would be interested in or willing to incorporate this into some of the Planning Commission meetings if you have any additional ones moving forward. So I think it would be good because, you know, especially in I know in my ward, a lot of my folks just don't do the virtual stuff. So I think we're unfortunately missing out on an opportunity to really get other people educated. But then again, I think we need to do what we need to do. And I think it's more important to get this included in the comp plan and integrated with our other work and efforts. So I guess my other question. Yeah, so I guess, you know, I'll keep this in mind too, as hopefully we'll have a town hall meeting coming forward, and maybe we can bring this up when I don't remember if Eric or Sally were going to come speak, but I want to get with you in terms of picking a date. And Joanne, I'll let you know too, and Jackie, to see if anybody wants to come. But I guess at this point, are there any other questions from the committee?
No, but it is exciting, and it's always fun to see Sean come up with magic and help us.
Yes.
So.
Huge.
I do want to put in one more plug as a thing. If we're talking about doing kind of formalizing this as like a separate plan at some point, I mean, we could certainly roll it. You know, I think at the work session last week with council, I mentioned that, you know, we need a Parks and Rec master plan here in the city. It's been a long time since we've had. We could certainly roll it into that when that time comes. You know, I think it's important to at some point integrate what we're doing with these conservation resources with our park system, you know, so they're not seen as separate systems. You know, they're one system, and you kind of people become more aware of the conservation easements and what they represent within the city. So
yeah, absolutely. And I guess what I want to say here as well is just, I'm not sure who would best handle this, but I think it'd be helpful for the council's perspective, and especially as we're, you know, nearing here another election coming up, and potentially a number of new council members coming in the middle of this or at the end, however the timeline works out. But I think it'd be good so this doesn't become the stereotypical plan that sits on a shelf, is to have maybe and maybe this is something more internally we have to talk about, but having like a briefing document, including a lot of these reports, or at least including let's face it, the council members aren't going to read all the reports, but I think we need to group together a lot of the executive summaries that reminds the council, okay, here are the goals that have been identified in this report. Here are the policy recommendations. So we can just flip to that and really identify and be reminded that, oh yes, this work was done, even though it was done last term or even 10 years ago, here's some policies we need to be keeping in mind as we move forward here. And especially I think that was the case with the bike master plan. I think staff utilized that perhaps a lot more so than I think the council did, but I think the council missed a lot of opportunities to use that and incorporate a lot of the recommendations in that. And maybe that fault lies certainly on the council ourselves. Maybe the committees need to be more diligent with digging into some of these reports and going through them. So anyway, I'll definitely, if I return, I'll definitely be glad to look forward to doing that with the Conservancy Board and staff in terms of on this committee to work with you on some of the policies coming out of that and implementation. Alderman Arnett?
Yeah, so I'm an old school, so I have copies on my bookshelf here of all of these plans and so forth, but it occurs to me that one of the things we don't do for council members, particularly new ones, we can do this because they'll be more facile with it than maybe me, but we should be giving council members a virtual bookshelf with all of these different reports in it. So even if they don't read it, which is not unlikely, they will have this bookshelf so that they can say, hey, they're talking about bicycles again, and they can go to the directory and say, hey, there's a report on this. Really, being a council member is sort of an on-the-job training that's continuous. And I think that the city could make it easier for council members to at least know all the work that's been done in the past by giving the council members and staff, for that matter, any staff that wanted this bookshelf, virtual bookshelf that has these studies. They're quite good. I remember the sidewalk study. I was very impressed with that, the primary, secondary, and tertiary sidewalk plan. There was a logic for how you would triage new sidewalks and repairs of existing sidewalks and things like that. So if it's convenient, I think people would come across it more often. So I need to put this in David Gerald's ear. Maybe this is something Lynn Farrell can take on and help us with. But Sean was going to say, it's already there, Ross. You just haven't opened it up.
I was just going to say that that's where the story map, I think, could give a good curated accounting of these plans with a description, like you said, or executive summary that would give the basics, but then a link to the whole report if someone needed to dive deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll prevent us from having to read as well.
Yeah, can we have the report in audio? We can listen to it at night before we go to sleep.
But with all seriousness, Alderman Arnett, I do think we need to maybe for our last few remaining weeks or months on this term, but also in the future, think about identify some reports we may want to discuss in further detail here in terms of any other policies coming out of them. But also I think that goes to staff to, I know you all put a lot of hard work into these documents, and especially for the environmental focus, we're always here to work with you and on making sure those reports get implemented. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. This is very good to hear an update on. Very exciting work. It's been a long time coming. It's been discussed for well over 10 years, I think. So it's great that we have the right team in place. So
yeah,
thank
Joanna did a great job herding all of the cats to get there.
Thank you all for all of your
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so next up on the agenda, Dr. Nash, if you stick with us, we'll jump right into some of the development updates. I guess we'll just go right to the January.
Do you want me to do December?
Yeah, December.
Sure, yeah, because I guess things will. We don't want to miss anything.
In December, the main updates were things, let's say 424 4th Street, we had an appeal that actually got postponed because that case is the Adams Ribs. It's going to circuit court next week. So they decided to not hear it yet at Board of Appeals. We've received the application for the second phase of Bay Village. That's going to be a retirement community. So this is the second part. The first part had an open ribbon cutting last week. And I'm in the process of getting them underway with their traffic impact study modified for COVID. As is Primrose School, also going forward now, trying to get their traffic study underway. And they are having a hearing next week on their forest conservation plan. And
for which project?
Primrose Schools, which is Baugh and Hilltop. For January, the most exciting project is the Hudson Street Public Works Garage.
Yay.
They're excited to be moving that one forward. It's going to Board of Appeals tonight and Planning Commission tomorrow night. And Jackie Gild has graciously agreed to come to Planning Commission so she can go through the environmental aspects of the project. And other than that, in January, the very familiar project Chesapeake Grove at Bimby Beach submitted revisions. I am also trying to get them a revised traffic study because their traffic study now is actually, they have had 2 traffic studies, but they're both pretty old at this point. Newtown 20, we've issued all the buildings.
Just go back to the Chesapeake Beach for a minute. Thought a brief, Alderman Arnett here, the traffic, since we have the traffic APF going through the process as well.
Right.
But in terms of this one, they actually, and I do want to give a lot of, again, I gave kudos over email, but a lot of kudos to staff. This project's been going on for well over 10 years, probably almost 15 at this point. And the current design is just significantly better than what it was to begin with. It's, they're still proposing to clear quite a bit of forest in the critical area, but and I'll get to that in a moment. But the impacts on the wetlands have been greatly reduced. In the wetlands, thanks to staff, they had them go out there and do another delineation because of all the just the change in hydrology in the area, and the wetlands had grown. So I think they got the developer to expand the wetland buffers even more than the state minimums, and incorporating a memorial on that property for the African American heritage, the public beach, history of the public beach. It is going to include a public access component, at least with the latest design, and a little drop-off point for the public. And but in terms of traffic, they did reduce the density slightly down from, well, it may have been much higher at one point, but it is down from 44 to 40, I believe, 40 units and now. And so the question becomes, even so with the original proposal of 44 units, that did impact one of the intersections, but all the way actually way down at the, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Nash, but the intersection way down at Forest Drive and Spa Road, one of the movements would be reduced from a D to an E, I believe. And so with the reduction in units, we're not sure if that's, I'm kind of curious if that's still going to impact traffic at least that one intersection. So I think that's what Dr. Nash is referring to in terms of having them go back a bit to see, because that is going to, I think, going to be important to know. And of course, since that's a county road, I believe, from my recall, Dr. Nash, it was listed that there's no, well, the mitigation identified was adjusting the timing of the lights, but the county has already told us before they're not going to do any further adjustment to the light timing. Is that right? So basically, we'd have to accept an E intersection.
Well, I'm trying to remember the timing of the last traffic study, because now with Crystal Springs, they're complete. The Villages at Providence Point developers are being required to completely rebuild that intersection at Spawn Forest and upgrade the traffic signals and all the crosswalks. And so I suspect that this time around, given the fewer number of units with the project, once they take those improvements into consideration, I wouldn't be able to speculate on their impacts, but certainly will be less than what it was. So we'll just have to see how that comes out.
Yeah. And the other interesting thing of note with this is, before I get to that, the other, I think, change I noticed was looking at the elevations may have been adjusted, because one of my concerns was how close this was to, it's right in the critical area next to the bay there, and in terms of future flooding risks, and since it is in the floodplain, and but it looks like the higher elevations, and I think the city would be accepting the roadway on the properties, but with the higher elevations, that hopefully, and I think the stormwater is better integrated with the existing wetland system, so
it's so much better. And we were really stuck for a long time. But we were able to negotiate the public access, and in fact, they might deed the waterfront part to the city. So that was wonderful. And then we had a very successful planning commission work session where they negotiated a few other things and really drove home the point about those 2 units up front really kind of weren't working for the 2 units by the water. So that was very productive.
Yeah, and so the final note, I guess, deals with the critical area mitigation. I don't recall exact numbers for the how many acres of forest they're proposing to clear, but in any case, because of the amount of trees removed in the critical area, they actually have to do a significant amount of mitigation. So with the critical area update that we passed last year at some point, we increased the fee in lieu, if you recall, Alderman Arnett, on that. And so it's more in line with the Forest Conservation Act. And so according to the numbers, though, they would actually have to pay a fee in lieu of, around $700,000. So it's quite a cost on with the total projects, $2.5–3 million, I think. So the $700,000 really gives them, obviously they're going to want to try to find a place to do that within the city. But I think that number is kind of important for us to hear, because if we do, for whatever reason, want to revisit the fee in lieu numbers, I think that it'd be an interesting conversation. I think we should have with Dr. Nash at some point about the fee in lieu for that. If we did overcompensate, or if it is it the right amount, if they're having a huge difficulty finding places to mitigate in the city to avoid that cost. I mean, we did want to attach an economic cost to the clearing of those areas for sure. But I think the one thing that maybe we want to consider is how there are more limited. The critical area monies can only be used in certain areas, obviously in the 100-foot buffer in that critical area, and there aren't too many options in the city. Where forest conservation, you have at least a bit more options. Critical area, not so much. So I guess, Dr. Nash, if you could just keep us updated on if it is proven to be just an impossible task, we may need to, Alderman Net, we may need to revisit that at some point.
And I know
Okay.
Joel has said that he wants to do a review of all the fee in lieu because it's coming up in more than one place. And I think that's right. We want it to be fair in both directions, fair to the citizens impacted, but also fair to the developers so that we're not making things unreasonable.
And I think the way the numbers work out is if it's 700,000, I'm guessing they're clearing approximately 2 acres, an acre and a half perhaps of worth of trees. They are doing a significant amount of replanting on the shoreline in the 100-foot buffer. They're putting in I think a bunch of Spartina, marsh vegetation and grasses, which is good. But again, Dr. Nash, we definitely would like to hear if some point, come back, and we could even do this as a part of the budget if need be. But if I guess just keep it posted on how.
We're also looking at ways to make it easier for them to plant trees on other sites. Because right now you have to record an easement. And so we're looking at other legal instruments that are a little bit easier to hurdles to overcome than that. So hopefully that would enable them to, give trees to other property owners, and that, that's kind of ideal. We want the trees ideally. So
yeah, I mentioned
certain things, but really we want the trees.
Yeah, and I mentioned laughing at Jackie's pet being in the way. But Dr. Nash, I mentioned that to Paul Bollinger with Crab because they're doing their redevelopment of the property. And, I was just speaking with him about an update on his project. And I was asking him if they were going to actually have extra open space. And it sounds like, they have to do a little bit of mitigation themselves, I think, if they decide to take down a few trees. But I think they'll have plenty of open space where they could certainly, I think, that's the kind of thing, I'm guessing staff is keeping in the back of their minds in terms of available areas. But that could be one way Crab could get a couple extra, money from the developers. Say, hey, we'll let you plant on our property. And they could pay them a minimal, they could pay them a much reduced fee as compared to the fee in lieu to allow them to put that on their property. But there are also other properties like down in the same area, at the very end of Bemba Beach Road, there's that single where I think the matriarch for the Bemba family lives down there, that one single old house on the big field. And, that has a lot of reforestation potential at the end of that road. So, but in any case, we'll have to just, and I guess the other thing with since Deputy City Manager Guild is here is how this fee in lieu money ties in. I know we have this agreement with the Critical Area Commission to be able to use the fee in lieu money a little bit differently than we have, right? I think that can go towards, correct me if I'm wrong, that can go towards grant projects within the critical area. Is that right?
It can, yes, it can. It can fund projects. We can use some of the money towards funding projects.
And that has to be 100% within the critical area?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So do we have any coming up in the critical area that we...
Grant funded projects, using the fee, no, we don't. I'm thinking of we have money coming from the Watershed Restoration Fund, which is a whole separate pot of money that we use for projects. Plus we gave the Chesapeake Bay Trust $300,000 for them to manage for applications that have been coming in.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's a separate pot of money. Where you're talking about the critical area fee in lieu pot of money, which yes, we can, if we choose to put it into something like the Chesapeake Bay Trust program or DNR's program or somebody's else in a different program, we could do that, but we haven't done that yet. So there's no money available for grants right now because we haven't chosen to do that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's potential expand how that's used in a similar way for I don't know. So some of these watershed organizations can do their help fund their shoreline work or the stabilization, or even some of the perhaps work.
Well, the city can use it too. If the city chose to do tree planting there, or some living shoreline there, or any kind of vegetation planting in the buffer or in the critical area in general, we could do that with that critical area fee in lieu pot of money we have.
So does that have to be used on plantings, or can it be used to address some of the other TMDL, for example, addressing sediment erosion?
We can do that.
Okay.
Within critical area. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So we're allowed to do restoration activities. It's defined pretty loosely.
Okay. Yeah, and that might be one way. Maybe we need to get a bit more creative with some of the fee in lieu alternatives, right? To say, if they have a high requirement for mitigation, maybe they can avoid having to pay the fee in lieu by, stabilizing an eroding outfall that's dumping out into the bay. There's one in, just off the top of my head, there's one I know, I think in Ross's ward, right near the post office or something, that was associated with the shopping center, or there's that one on the at the Brewer Hill Cemetery, right? I know there's already somebody who's repairing that outfall, but just as an example, I think that'd be definitely to the city's benefit if we could say, hey, we'll give you this break on this high fee in lieu if you just go ahead and repair some of our failing infrastructure, which is still going to provide the same kind of benefit in the end. But I guess we'd have to specifically add that into a list into the code as far as a possible alternative. Just thinking out loud here.
You're thinking about doing that in lieu of planting trees as required in the Forest Conservation Act, or?
No, just for the critical area mitigation.
Critical area, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I could see the logic behind that. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts on that before Dr. Nash continues?
Continues. I thought she was done.
No, she was on Newtown, right? Weren't you on Newtown?
I'm almost finished. Yes, Newtown 20, we issued building and grading permits. So that project is under construction. And we've got revisions in for Parole Place, another old timer. Well, just 2017. I already mentioned Primrose School. So that those are my updates for December and January.
While we have Sally here, Sally, could you update this committee on the resilience grant, the DoD grant? So since we're looking at the RFPs this week.
Right. We are reviewing RFPs. We got 7 bids in, and we're meeting, is it this week, Jackie, to review the bids? And I have a big group of helpers like Jackie, and which is good because the proposals are very complex. It's a big grant. It's going to be looking at a lot of resiliency factors to find different ways all around NSA Annapolis and the impacts of resiliency on NSA Annapolis, but also in the city. And a lot of them have very robust GIS aspects, very robust traffic and evacuation planning parts, and very robust resiliency work. Some firms I know pretty well, some I haven't ever heard of, but it's going to be a tough choice. So it's pretty exciting. It's going to be about a year-long project, and just amazing. Just the proposals are amazing. So,
which project did you say this is for?
This is for the resiliency grant from the Department of Defense that we got to look at impacts around the Navy and the Navy base, and how in the city and county, and how to mitigate those. So we're working also with staff from Anne Arundel County and NSA Annapolis as the team. And you and all of council will be hearing a lot more about it once the consultants are on board and start doing their stakeholder outreach.
Excellent. That's very good news.
Wish we could read them. It'd be exciting. Because reading grants, I find in my past professional life was quite educational. Took forever, and they give you volume after volume, but still, you learn a lot.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all. Anything else before we move on to some legislation? All right. So next, thank you, Dr. Nash. I guess I'm guessing you'll be sticking with us for the small cell. We'll try to move through the rest of this pretty quickly for everybody. All right. The next up is 04620, which is public health and safety. And let's see, we discussed this at Rules of City Government. Mm-hmm. And in terms of the environmental impact, that's kind of the motivator behind my amendment number 5, which is which the public works director sounded like he was very happy with, if you recall, or at least fine with, in terms of changing the current wording, which currently says that the Deputy City Manager for Resilience and Sustainability would have enforcement for the foam ban. And so the amendment would just simply make this into the Public Works or their designee. So either their environmental compliance inspector or somebody else within the group would be handling that enforcement. Because just to refresh your memory, the law office reminded us that the Deputy City Manager's office does not have any kind of enforcement powers. And I was also worried that I know that office has enough to do, not to mention, not to pile on. So with that explanation, I guess, do I have a motion on this legislation, or any other discussion, I should say, first on this legislation?
I think it's been discussed quite thoroughly by a lot of other committees. I would recommend that we move favorably with the 5 amendments.
Okay, I will second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. And moving on to the next one. I think we'll just take, actually, no, that makes it difficult for Ms. Green. 02920, small cells, this is the main ordinance. And on this one, I can't remember if I requested it came to this or if I may have, but in either case, I don't remember exactly why. I don't think this has any kind of environmental impact other than perhaps aesthetic impact. But, and I know, Alderman Arnett, you were commenting a bit on the size of the structure. The ones I saw that are kind of just placed around on top of the utility pole don't seem too impactful, but there could be other models out there. I don't know. So just want to turn it to you, Alderman.
Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, Dr. Nash, when I looked at the illustrations that were attached, it looks to me like it was the same vintage of technology that we looked at several years ago, at least 4 years ago, maybe more. I guess it was towards the end of Josh's administration, maybe it was Mike's, but in any event, I thought there was going to be a whole new generation of smaller cells. This looks like it has the big antenna up at the top of the pole, but then down at the bottom of the pole, there's this couple of big panels, one of which had high voltage in it. And I remember when we were discussing this the last time, one of the boxes out in the county, 2 teenagers were climbing around and managed to give themselves a shock from the stuff they were trying to break in the boxes to see what the equipment was, and they got zapped, which seems like just desserts, but nevertheless is a liability here. Is this now a 5th generation, or are we still back on those bigger systems that they were showing us way back then?
Well, you're correct in that the small in the small cell definition does not mean small in size of equipment, because the cabinet that goes along with the antennas, which can be integrated into the pole in almost a seamless way. It's really the impact there is if they have to add more height, but it is the cabinet that can be large, and it depends on the exact type that they use, how much it sticks out. I mean, I would think, it is going to be on street level. Sometimes it is at right above head level, but I think that is a little more visually impactful than having a wider cabinet at the bottom. So there's different ways to do it, and we're still trying to sort out the best images of how we want to show the companies do this, not that. And so we're still kind of updating the guidelines. We want to pick the design that has the least visual clutter, especially for the historic district. I mean, obviously we want a safe design as well, but these they have to go pretty close to one another. So we don't want them everywhere downtown.
Right. And that was one of the things from the last time, because I think it was Verizon, and Verizon didn't want to share. So we had this vision. I think it was one of the things that turned Alderman Budge off was at virtually every pole, if you had Verizon and AT&T and Sprint, whatever the one that merged, but you would have virtually every pole downtown occupied with these pieces of equipment because none of them were sharing. It didn't sound to me like that has changed. They all want their own.
No, they don't share. They don't like to share. They could have more. You could have more than one cabinet on one pole, but I think that would arguably be worse. So, it is their preference to have their own poles. And sometimes it depends on who owns the pole. So there's a lot of factors like that, but we have fairly limited means to regulate these. The FCC says your regulations have to be technically feasible, and they're pretty strict about, if they can't do this, then they are allowed to do that. So we're trying to make the best we can of the situation.
Exactly. So I guess my question is this still in flux, or I think at least one of the other committees postponed action because there was still changes going on with the guidelines and other things. So I agree.
Right. I'm waiting for some more information on the guidelines. I'm getting close to finishing them, but I'll have to. I'm actually waiting. AT&T said they had some images, good images or examples of good images. And I've also gotten some pretty good images from Verizon. So I need to sit down and work on it, basically.
In terms of environment, is there any indication at all that there are things that are emanating from these cabinets that could be unhealthy for if there was a lot of exposure? Like if your house has one right next to it, are they putting out death rays that eventually will warp your brain?
Well, this was brought up at a committee meeting, and there's not any definitive evidence that I know of that shows that they're a health hazard. I think they are of concern for a lot of people, and I know that that's been discussed, but I don't think there's any clear evidence to show that they're hazardous.
So,
and I verify that, Sally, as well. That's what I know too. There's some evidence out there that there may be some associated health programs associated with these boxes, but nothing definitive yet. It's kind of, it's new technology, and it hasn't, some cities have had them online for a couple of years now. And, I know it takes a while for the medical community to gather that kind of information and verify it. So we don't have a definitive answer for you, sorry.
And my understanding is that it's more similar to the Wi-Fi wavelength signal than it is to a cellular, or is it somewhere in between a traditional cellular signal? So I know there were concerns about cellular, cell towers, but I don't think the research has quite borne that out. But if this is more similar to Wi-Fi, there may not be much cause for concern. But I don't know for that for certain.
So, Mr. Chair, I am hard pressed to find anything that should be a problem for the Environmental Matters Committee. So I would be inclined to recommend that we recommend favorably and in effect defer to the other committees, let them do their work and let Dr. Nash continue to work on the guidelines, but let's clear some of the committees out of the way. Would be my inclination. So I would make a motion that Environmental Matters recommend favorably to the City Council.
I'll second that motion. And just before I...
With the amendments.
Yeah, that's fine with me. I'll second that. Just a quick question before we have that vote for Dr. Nash. It's not not necessarily environment related, but anyway, I'm sorry if you've already mentioned this, but what do they do in situations where downtown we don't have utility poles, and do they put up a new structure to house these? And the second part of that question is, how is this going to impact if we do have an effort to bury some of our utilities in the future?
Well, they might need to install new poles. Generally, they can do it on the existing poles. From what I've heard is there are enough poles, but they might still need to replace a pole here and there just based on the existing strength of the pole that's there. For undergrounding utilities, I don't know the answer to that. I know that in a lot of places, the jurisdictions have tried to require undergrounding of small cell facilities, and that has generally meant litigation and no movement on the installation of the technology. So I don't really know.
Okay. Well,
on undergrounding.
What was that?
I said I wouldn't hold my breath on undergrounding. The utilities make it so outrageously expensive, and it's because they don't want to do it. But if we were ever going to do it, downtown in particular would be the place, not just because of aesthetics, but also because of potential interference with firefighting apparatus and things like that.
Well, it'd be nice if we could have some kind of a situation where they would, if there are no, or they would help us with putting utilities underground, but they could, if they would be able to essentially plant a tree and somehow, I don't know, if they could like incorporate these devices into a tree or near a tree, and we could kind of have the best of both worlds there. But again, I don't know if the technology is there to do that or not. So with that, I guess we have a motion on the floor, and I seconded it. So all those in favor of a favorable recommendation, please say aye.
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 I meant to include both the accompanying resolutions for the fees and fines.
Let's just do that separately for Ms. Green.
Okay. All right.
So so the motion carries on O2920. Next up, Ms. Green, can we do R4120 and R4220 at the same time? Okay. Do you want to make a motion for that one?
I move we recommend favorably for both the fees and the fines.
All right, I'll second that. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion's carry. Thank you. And last but not least, we have update from Deputy City Manager.
Yep. Okay. Keep it, try to keep it short here. So just to let you know what's going on. Resilience, since we're talking about resilience, one thing I have not briefed you on since I talked to you last is that the city with MK Associates put in a grant to the Maryland Energy Administration to study the feasibility of doing resilience hubs and microgrids in the city. And
that's great.
MK, sorry?
That's great.
Yeah, so a resilience hub is, for example, we use one of our existing emergency centers, let's say like Pip Moyer, for example, and it's a place where people can come when there's a flood, when there's a hurricane, when they've lost power, when there's extreme heat or cold, for shelter and food and showers, etc. But if they don't have power, then there's no heat there or cool. It can't really act as a reliable heating center or cooling center or shelter. So the idea is to provide clean, reliable energy in the form of solar at these locations, whether it would be the Stanton Center or Pip Moyer or churches or other facilities that city's currently using, and anything else we need to do as far as resources to make them truly resilience hubs. And then the center would actually always benefit from the fact that they have this power and could use it as backup power. Similar to the kind of feasibility study we were looking at for Newtown 20, but this is looking at resilience hubs throughout the entire city. It's not just for disadvantaged communities, although a lot of emphasis will be put on that, but throughout everywhere in the city, so we're truly resilient when it comes to emergency situations. And then, of course, it benefits that facility as well. And then also looking at if we can do microgrids for solar power throughout the city. Now, we did look at Newtown 20. We're still looking, finishing up that process with the Smart Energy Power Alliance and BG&E. I think where that one is coming down on in the end is that it would only serve 78 families or units, and it could not serve outside of Newtown 20. So most microgrids, you want to serve a greater area than just 78 people or family units. And it is also, Newtown 20 is not located in a vulnerable geographic area. So it's not prone to flooding or any other kind of vulnerability, really. So still that information will be useful in looking at other microgrid locations in the city. We've kind of done a lot of the work already. And so this, the grant work, actually, I had to do some work to support it, but largely was done by a group called MK Associates, which approached us. One of the people who worked on the Newtown 20 project when she was at SEPA had moved over to MK Associates and came to us with this idea for Annapolis. MK Associates has done resilience grids and resilience hubs and microgrid work all over the world, and at military installations in underdeveloped countries, and they have a lot of expertise in this area. So we are very glad to have them submit the grant on our behalf with Annapolis as the focus. We will find out whether we receive that grant probably at the end of February or early March. So that's a new grant. Another grant that I'm working on right now that I have to put in by March 4th to the Chesapeake Bay Trust is, you've all probably heard about the restoration work the city is planning for Hawkins Cove. So Hawkins Cove is, basically used pretty much just as a cut through. There's trails there that connect people from one side of Eastport to over Primrose Street and the Spa Cove apartments over there. People are basically going between Truxton Park and Eastport and back and forth. The Naval Academy NIDS run through there. And the actual waterfront area is not being utilized at all. It's not very appealing. If you've been down there, it's heavily silted in. Probably 30 plus years of sedimentation coming downhill off the streets and through the woods there. The Spa Creek Conservancy did a restoration project, a regenerative stream conveyance system, either 2017 or 2018. And that probably took care of a lot of the sediment flow and a lot of pollutants that are coming off streets and sidewalks and rooftops. So what we have there as far as sediment in the metals, et cetera, that are in that sediment, it's probably really due to everything that happened before that project went in. But there's a pier there and it's missing some boards. You can't use it. You can't tie up to it or launch from it because of the sediment. There's a failing bulkhead there that we would likely replace with a living shoreline or some other vegetated buffer to buffer the shoreline better and to absorb more pollution and return the ecosystem. Pretty much there's no submerged aquatic vegetation anymore there because of the sediments. It smothered everything. We have some invasive Phragmites. On the landward side, it's mostly, ivy, et cetera, pulling down trees. We have dead trees. We have a lot of invasives. And so the landward side really is not appealing nor potentially, really usable at this point. So what the city is doing first before we put in for the grant is we've done a series of listening sessions. And I know all of you have participated in them already. We have one tonight at 7. That's the final one where we summarize the feedback we've received during those listening sessions. The city put out a survey. We have some response to that. We all summarize that. We've had our African-American liaison and our Hispanic liaison passing out flyers to communities, to condos and apartment complexes, and to the Eastport Terrace inhabitants and the Harbor House residents as well. And got some input from talking to people as they've been doing that. I've been out there and I've run into people walking their dogs, going for walks, kids going to Truxton Park, and I've talked to them too. So I've got some anecdotal information I've gathered. And so we'll summarize that and take some more comments before we kind of distill those into what the community would like to use, how they would like to use Hawken Cove, what amenities they would like to see there. And we'll put that into our grant application. Of course, if we receive the grant to do a design and to do some construction there, we'll come up with a concept design, which we will then put out to the community for further input before a final design is arrived at. What we're hearing right now is mostly that people want to see it left in a natural state. They would like to see improvements on the shoreline. They like the idea of a living shoreline. They like the idea of being able to launch some kayaks, paddle boards, be able to use the pier for fishing, crabbing, etc. They would like, maybe some picnic tables, benches, but don't want to see a lot of other, they like the idea of getting rid of the invasives and putting natural native vegetation in, but don't want to see the natural state changed a lot with, like, for example, a basketball court or a volleyball court or something like that. And also, we've been hearing that people who like the idea of improving the trails. There's places where they are a little muddy. There might be some areas we might want to put steps in to make them more senior accessible. I've been out there in the snow and after the snow, and it's pretty muddy in some places. We've heard comments that perhaps the footbridge that was installed over the creek there that leads to Hawkins Cove could be extended over the wetlands area to protect the wetlands. And also, so it'll be less boggy for walking. It's a good point. And also signage, so that there's a description of, if we do a living shoreline and there's already a RSC there, system there, we could explain what that system is, what the living shoreline is, and why it's there, how it protects the environment and protects the shoreline. And so signage was also another item that was requested. So that, as I said, that grant is due to the trust on March 4th. I'll be working on that in the next couple of weeks.
And Jackie, can I interject something?
Sure.
It's tangential, but remember when you and I were talking about it, and Alderman Gay has notions that because that's so close to the public housing there, that well, first of all, he wants us to lease it to public housing, which I'm not particularly thrilled with, but we were talking about things we could do that would attract people from public housing. And one of the notions was that we might have some sort of thing that paid homage to the African-American watermen. And in a tangential thing for the work session tomorrow on the redoing of the old waterworks pump house, for the woodworkers, the suggestion is that we let the woodworkers rent that space in kind, and they could be somebody we could commission potentially to do some sort of a commemorative thing. I have envisioned the prow of a workboat with a waterman holding some oyster tongs or something like that, so we can sort of parlay some of these things together and make them cross-purpose.
Yes, and that was a good point you raised with me before. Yeah, so, to bring the history of the area in was another good point. And also to use it as environmental education, especially for the kids who are living in that area who participate in the Stanton Center. I've been working with Archie to get more environmental education and the after-school programs and summer programs at the rec center and the Stanton Center. So this could feed into that as well. And if the shoreline is more accessible through what we do there, kids could actually do some seining and crabbing and learn about the ecosystem, walk on the trails, learn about what we've done there to improve the ecosystem. So it could also be an environmental education field trip spot.
Right.
And there's a lot of support for that. And the main thrust of what we're emphasizing in the community listening sessions, we're not emphasizing the ecological uplift part of this as much, and the actual environmental restoration component, because these community listening sessions are more geared to what does the community want to see there, and how do they want to use Hawkins Cove? How do they use it now? What are their concerns? The ecological and habitat restoration will happen anyway, but it will be designed around what the community wants as far as use at that site. But what's becoming clear during our listening sessions is that the community likes the improvements we're talking about, but they are also very concerned about restoring the environmental benefits of the site. So we're emphasizing also that this is going to be done for the community, for the people who live close by, and we really want the people who live in Harbor House and Eastport Terrace and kids who live around there to see this as a place that they can use, that it's their area and it's a place where they can gather and enjoy it.
So the other thing that's related, I had a conversation with Eileen Fogarty last night, and I'm thinking about for the task force, the Maritime Task Force, but also in connection with the City Dock redo. We're working with Wendy, I can't think of her last name, from National Parks, and we're talking about all these water access points up and down Spot Creek and Back Creek. So I hope when we do this, just like we're trying to get water access at Wells Cove, and I see there looks like some lawsuit information that I just got from Jess Packler, but I'm hoping that when we do Hawkins Cove, there's going to be the potential for a water taxi stop there. And I think that's particularly important. Water taxi is still pretty cheap. And I think for people from public housing to be able to walk down to that dock, have a fun water taxi ride, and be able to go downtown or go anywhere they want to go on the water. But so I'm hoping that we are still keeping in mind this as a water access point.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and then another, an option would be to design it in a way that you could launch a kayak, launch a paddleboard, launch a canoe. Again, that will be dependent on what we do on the water side to get beyond all of that sediment. And I know the mayor is very keen on providing a water taxi there. That may require dredging, and that would have to be funded separately.
So what about John Butler's notion of extending the pier out further?
The pier could be extended out further. To get to where there's navigable water, that would have to be an extremely long pier. He also had an idea about an extended boardwalk around the sides of it, or just building a boardwalk over the Silton Inn area. That's likely not something that NDE would approve, especially not on the sides of the cove. A living shoreline, they're generally about 30 feet in width. Some of it goes landward, most of it goes outward towards the water. It could use up a lot of the area that's silted in and get you out towards deeper water. There still may need to be some dredging involved. I don't think that's something the trust would fund. I'm not ruling out entirely, but they usually don't fund that kind of thing. But I know that the water taxi is very important to the mayor. The water taxi has gone up to $5 a trip. Kind of bouncing this around with Will Rowley yesterday. Maybe what we can do to make it more accessible to others and children especially would be to provide some vouchers.
Yes. I was just going to say that.
Just throwing that out there. I'm not saying that we're definitely, that might be, that's an idea. Perhaps we can subsidize that a little bit, but, just so that it'd be a water taxi that is accessible to everybody.
Right.
And also we're trying to manage expectations right now. We're taking in all ideas, no matter how fanciful or expensive they might be.
Right.
But we're telling everyone we're taking in all of your ideas, but some of these things may be either beyond the budget. We might have to do them in phases. The trail improvements might have been done at a different time than the living shoreline and the pier. And we might have to address the pollution coming down the driveway behind the HACA building at a different time. And then some things may not be allowed by the Army Corps of Engineers or the Critical Area Commission or MDE. But right now it's just idea generating.
Yeah. So I think I always try to think globally, and I know the mayor thinks this way too, where we can parlay things. It's a shame. I think it was Will and I that were talking about how many people, particularly a lot of the young people who live in public housing, who have never been on the water ever.
Yeah.
Ever. And so this water taxi idea, where if we can provide a voucher so that it's reasonably affordable. I mean, some people just get on the water taxi to take a water taxi ride. They don't even have it. So I think that anything we could do to sort of stimulate that would be a good thing. But anyway, this is all exciting, and the ones of your public meetings that I've attended have been well received. So congratulations to you and Will for doing that. And of course, we needed to do it as a condition of the grant, but it's nice when that also turns out to be something nice.
Well, we didn't have to do it as a condition of the grant. We can apply for community engagement, but we're doing it ourselves. And so the work that we're doing is like a match on the grant. So we can take our time and resources we've already invested and use it as a match, which the trust really likes to see. And you also mentioned water access and the advisory board. I actually briefed the Maritime Advisory Board last night, and they were very supportive of the city's proposed project and are providing me a letter of support for the grant.
Okay, good.
Let's see. Speaking of grants, I mentioned earlier in response to one of Rob's questions that the city has provided $300,000 out of the Watershed Restoration Fund to the Chesapeake Bay Trust to fund coastal resilience projects that are applied for by nonprofits and homeowners associations and others. The trust and city staff have been on, I think, about 10 to 12 visits by potential applicants. All of those visits have now been completed, and applicants must get their grant proposals in by the March 4th deadline as well. It's a different pot of money. So we're hoping to make several grants. We can make them as low as a small grant can be like $10,000 to $15,000 up to a $100,000 grant. So we could have 3 large projects or an assortment of smaller or small and large projects. So when the trust receives those proposals, they will vet them, cull them into the ones that are most likely to be funded, and then meet with city staff to decide on which ones will actually be funded. So this is the Anne Arundel County restoration pot, which Annapolis is part of, and we take our funding and use it for the city projects, and Anne Arundel County takes the money they put in and use it for their projects. But the trust administers and manages the grants for us, which helps quite a bit. And let's see what else is going on here. I was invited to be part of a sea level rise advisory group that the Department of Natural Resources convened, and that people that are participating on that come from the county, from MDE, from DNR, from the Army Corps, Critical Area Commission, anyone who has everything and anything to do with sea level rise in the state. They are going to put, with the aim of this advisory group is to put out a guidance to all the cities and counties of the state on what parameters we should be using to measure sea level rise, what types of actions we can take, whether it's a code revision or requirement on elevations, ways to protect properties and businesses, building requirements, setback requirements, protecting coast requirements. We're going to have one document that provides the guidance to everyone in the state. At the end of it is our goal. So this will go on. The goal is to have a guidance document by summer. So we had our first meeting this week, and we'll meet, I believe, every week until then, until we get the document done. And those are the highlights.
Great.
Yes.
Alderman Arnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we did an incredible amount of work years ago with Weather It Together, some of which seems to be very relevant to this. Is that another one of those sets of documents that are sitting on a shelf somewhere?
Actually, just when I said that's the highlights, I thought about one thing I left off, and that is the draft resiliency plan that we worked on last year with the University of Maryland and Throw Environmental. And I met with Sally and Eric Lashinsky last week to talk to them about, how we can take this draft that we all worked so hard on and make it a final resiliency plan. And it needs to incorporate the Weather It Together information in there. And that study was done. There were some properties identified, but nothing more was done with it after that. So I actually made a presentation on resilience and the intersection of climate change and historical preservation to the Historical Preservation Commission last week. And we talked about that we need to get that back off the shelf and start. Yeah. I need to start working with planning and zoning on how we implement the recommendations that were made and what we need to do to address protections to our cultural resources. So that will be part of the resilience plan. What Sally and Eric and I decided is that I was my position now being created for just this purpose, I will take the lead on finalizing the resilience plan with the help of planning and zoning and public works and everybody else that needs to be involved. And Weather It Together will be part of that.
So whatever happened to Dan Neese and Joanna Throw? Are they still working, or?
Their work is completed with the city as far as that project is concerned.
Okay. Did we ever get anything?
We got a draft plan. We got they call them recommendations to the city for us to use in putting together our plan. Sally took it and then tried to make it more of a resilience plan rather than recommendations, and city staff all had input into it. And that was done last summer. July 2020, I think was the last time Sally touched it. And so that we took it up again last week to decide how to move forward. And I said I would take the lead on it.
Okay. Well, we have the Resiliency Authority, we had the Resiliency Plan, we have the Weather It Together, and they do make for a full shelf.
So the resilience plan was just a draft. It was recommendations, and then Sally, with our help, turned it into a draft plan. But it's not a final plan yet. So that's where we're going next, because the city is doing a lot of work in the resiliency area, but we're not following a plan at this point. And what we need is to—
I wouldn't say that too loud.
So what we need to do is take this draft plan that we have with all these great ideas, and it incorporates a lot of the things we're already doing. And since that draft plan was put together, we've started a lot of other projects that are resiliency oriented. And so we need to feed those into the plan as well and make it a final plan. Present it to City Council, make it a final plan.
That would be great. Yeah, absolutely.
I hope now that we have it at the deputy city manager level, we'll have more tangible movement forward.
Yeah.
That is my plan. And it's one of my highest priorities. As you know, I keep getting pulled in all sorts of different directions, but we need to get this plan done.
So does Sally and her staff. So I think anytime we can shift one of these burdens away from her and them, even though you have a full plate too, but I just, every time I think about all the things that we're expecting Sally to do, it's
yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And Sally and Eric agree that it's kind of on the same, now that the comprehensive plan has been delayed a little bit, from COVID, they're looking at a summer kind of getting it done, solid draft done. I'm on the same timeline with the resilience plan. So we think that the resilience plan can be a standalone document, but also could be an attachment to the comprehensive plan.
Good. All right.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. That is, like you said, exactly, I think, what we had in mind for your position. So glad to hear we're making progress on that. I had one other question about do you have any update or information on the St. Anne's Living Shoreline project?
The St. Mary's?
Yeah, sorry, St. Mary's.
Yeah. They go before the Historic Preservation Commission. I don't have the exact dates. Later this month, there's a meeting next week to talk about their prep for that meeting. It's a tough nut. I can tell that the Preservation Commission understands the value of the project and would like to find a way to make it work, but they feel very constrained by the current Department of Interior guidelines and rules. And probably the biggest problem there is, very important to the historic nature of the property is this linear the visual look of it being a very straight linear shoreline. And the living shoreline would be kind of a curved, like small coves in and out, almost like, kind of like a snake in and out, in and out. It's how it works to, develop the buffer part of it. I don't know that we're going to be able to get around that. So it's a tough one. And the Preservation Commission at the last meeting, that was a couple months ago, asked the St. Mary's team to figure out a compromise solution. So I don't know if they were able to come up with a compromise solution or not. Something that will allow the historical aspect, the visual historical aspect to remain intact and also accomplish their goal of buffering the shoreline and making it more resilient and natural.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Yeah, hopefully they can get to that point. And my fear with some of that it would just be the historic preservation community and the environmental community just fighting over this. And it sounds like that hasn't happened, which is good, at least not to a huge degree. So hopefully they can find a compromise before they. So it sounds like they're at least willing to have that conversation, right?
They are. I think that the St. Mary's team is a bit frustrated. I know, DNR is concerned. They're funding the project. They've provided quite a bit of funding money already for design. And I know there's some reluctance to continue to fund the project if it can't go forward because of historic, requirements. So I think there's some frustration. I mean, everyone's trying to work together, but it's a tough project to try to meet the environmental goals within historic parameters.
Yeah.
The problem there is that St. Mary's maintains that bulkhead and at some expense, and they're not required to do that. They could let it just go if they chose to, and then if it gets to a point at which it's in disrepair, then they can't replace it with another bulkhead. They will have to replace it under the Living Shoreline Act with a living shoreline. Yeah, and I know, and then there's that, what happens because of historic requirements. are we just going to let the land erode out from under it, and then we do lose part of St. Mary's property? So there's competing interests on both sides.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we have a bigger mooring basin.
There you go. And then, and that's the other concern was how, the living shorelines I talked about before, they're usually about 30 feet wide. In this case, they would need to dig back into the existing property of St. Mary's to make this work. And then it comes out a certain distance into the water, and a couple of the mooring balls would have to be moved. They could be moved upstream into Spot Cove. We can't get rid of them because they were acquired through a grant. We'd either have to pay DNR for the mooring balls or find another location for them because it was grant provided. It's tricky. I'm curious as to, on Monday, I think it's Monday, I find out from St. Mary's, what they've come up with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'd like to know as well. So we'll probably ask about this next meeting.
Yeah.
But if you have any design, if they have any proposal, you could share with the committee. I'm sure we'd all be curious, especially Alderwoman Tierney as well, since this is in her area.
Okay. If they have a new design, I can share that with you.
Is there going to be any excitement at the Board of Appeals tonight on the Hudson plan?
I don't think so. I told them, since I have a community engagement session at the same time to text me if they need me. I am going to be available to testify for the Planning Commission tomorrow night. I think that that facility addressed all of the Environmental Commission's concerns adequately. Everything that I commented on, they had an answer for. I think it's a good design. They're doing a lot of stormwater retention on site. There's a lot of protection from the salt dome. There's all kinds of a capture for the salt water. In fact, there's an RSC system being put on the slope behind the building. I know there's some mitigation they need to do for tree cover there. There's a green roof going in. Solar, there was not enough room for solar, which we had hoped to get. We had, the Environmental Commission had raised to go for the highest LEED building requirements to meet the highest LEED. But they, and Betsy Kim, who was the project manager, wanted to go for gold standard, but they weren't able to do that. It was a balancing of costs, but they are going for silver. Our code currently says only LEED. It does not specify. So just raising that for you guys to think about. But so Betsy is,
we have it just right.
Betsy is going for silver, which is better than just, the bottom barrel LEED. But our code just says all we have to do is LEED right now.
Yeah. And, I have legislation I've been mulling over changing some of that. I spoke with somebody who used to work with LEED and said that, well, the standards keep getting stronger every year, so it may not be a bad thing to have it be even at the base level. It's better than it was just a few years back. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But, if you have any other suggestions for that, we could certainly.
Yeah, I know the only thing that the Environmental Commission is providing a letter of support for the project, but within that letter, still asking if they can put in permeable pavers and other things like that. Permeable pavers aren't realistic in most of the areas of that site because of the weight of the trucks that go in there. I think the commission was, suggesting that in the area where the staff is parking, where there are no trucks going, if they could have permeable pavers there. I think that's one of their last suggestions that they have, and just want to make sure that as much stormwater retention is happening as possible on that site, which they are meeting.
Mm-hmm. I thought this is for the public works, right?
This is for the public works maintenance facility.
Yeah, I thought that the city code though said LEED silver for the municipal buildings.
Don't believe it does. I think it just says LEED for the municipal buildings.
All right, well, in any case, we'll have to take a look at that. Because I thought it was the base certification for everybody else except for city government, which was silver. But I could be wrong on that. Okay, well, anything else? Any other updates? No. All right. No. Well, I think we're all set. Alderman Arnett, any other questions for Ms. God or for the good of the order?
No, nope. I don't know whether, let me see if you got this email from Jess. May have only gone to Dwan and I, but we got all kinds of stuff hopping with Wells Cove. That was the lawyer who I think may have filed some kind of filing with the city. So I'm meeting with the mayor, the city attorney, and the city manager tomorrow morning to try to figure out what we're going to do to try to maintain water access there. I'm hopeful, but boy, the community is definitely wound up about this, as they should be. I mean, I think that they're right, and we'll see how we can pull our ashes out of the fire on this one. So having said that, if there's nothing else, I'll be happy to make a motion that we adjourn.
All right, I'll second that motion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Hi, Jackie.
Thank you. Thank you, Jackie.
Welcome.
Thank you, Takia. All right. Is adjourned.